Today, the North Sea Transition Authority, the oil and gas regulator, approved a drilling licence for the Rosebank North Sea oil field. This is really good and exciting news. I was Energy Secretary for all of 7 weeks, and one of the things I really wanted to do was to make sure we maximised the use of our own resources so we didn't have to get them from other people. And this attracts international investment. Norway's Equinor, along with Britain's own Ithaca Energy, will commence the £3.4 billion development, which is expected to yield about 300 million barrels of oil. This is a victory for Britain's economy and global energy security. The project could create 1,600 jobs, and with the effective tax rate of 75% on energy produced in the UK, it will raise a fortune for the Treasury. Most importantly, it will boost global energy security. Not, of course, on its own, but as part of other countries and are doing more of this where we can. Because the more production that comes from outside OPEC or dictatorial states, the safer supplies will be and the lower prices. We're often told by the likes of Ed Miliband that using domestic energy resources won't affect the price of energy because it's sold on the international market. But this is inaccurate. Yes, of course it's sold on the international market, but the international price, as with all pricing, is set at the margin, which means that a boost to supply will lower prices overall. As you know, Saudi and Russian oil production has been affected, and the Saudis have cut production by more than 1 million barrels a day, which pushes the oil price up, and it's at its highest since autumn of last year, when the cost of energy was still in a crisis mode and recovering from its peak, which is why it's more important now than ever that we need to boost whatever supply we can from the democratic world to provide supplies to the international market. It also helps our own economy because some of this oil will be used domestically, and that part that is used domestically is cheaper and more efficient than imported oil because you don't have the import costs. This applies to gas as well. In Britain, our gas supplies, about a third comes from domestic resources, a third comes via pipeline, mainly from Norway, and the other third comes from liquefied natural gas. And the problem with natural gas, liquefied natural gas, is the shipping costs, and that's coming from the United States and Qatar, and it has to be liquefied and then regasified, both of which use energy. So by the time it arrives on land and is injected into the gas grid, it's cost you more and it's had more emissions. And this is true that oil and gas, even if the supply doesn't make a huge effect on the international price, will save on the attached costs by using domestic supply. And it adds to carbon efficiency, which is an interesting dilemma for the Green lobby because they don't want to use our domestic supply of oil and gas, even though using imported oil and gas increases CO2 emissions. Chairman of Ithaca Energy, one of the investors, pointed out in terms of CO2 emissions, importing oil, listen to this, importing oil is roughly 6 times the amount of producing it locally in a new field, and importing gas can be up to 10 times as much as producing it locally. As the Prime Minister pointed out earlier this year, when he announced new North Sea licences, even in 2050, when we reach net zero, a significant portion of our energy will still be derived from fossil fuels. It's net zero, it's not absolute zero. And this is a simple reality, and it's why it makes sense to use our own domestic supply, provide cheaper energy, lower carbon emissions, and make sure that we get the economic benefit rather than it seeping abroad. Of course, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts, and you know the email off by heart by now, mailmog@gbnews.com.